All right, hi. I'm Valerie, Parham-Thompson. I'm an open source database engineer right now working on the production field team for YugabyteDB. And today I'm going to talk about how to use our APIs to automate some common tasks. So here's the agenda, brief overview, brief discussion of database lifecycle, brief discussion of why we want to automate. And the meat of this is really a deep dive into our APIs, as much as I can do in 25 minutes, and also a live demo. So here's the one slide of the overview of YugabyteDB, and this doesn't cover any of the processes like T-server processes or the master processes. What I really want to focus on here are two things. One is that the control plane is separate from the data plane. So the control plane can go down, data plane is unaffected. It's not a proxy, it's not an application path. So that's where the REST APIs are running. API is an overloaded term. So what I'm not talking about are the data access APIs, the YSQL and the YCQL. I'm talking about the REST APIs that are used to control things that are happening in the database. Okay, database lifecycle. So we talk about database lifecycle in terms of day one and day two operations. Day one operations are things like provisioning, configuration, setting up high availability. Day two are things like monitoring, backups, changes. And these things extend, really far into the lifecycle. But even though this list is long, it doesn't really show the number of tasks that you have to do in day two. And if you just explode one of those, the backups, you see there's a ton of tasks, right? You have to set up schedules and do restores and monitor and things like that. So it just becomes a lot of individual tasks. So the number of tasks is a hint, right? But why do you want to automate? Why do you want to use an API? So here's a view of our UI. This is the control plane, and it's great, right? It's really pretty, first of all. But you can also do a lot of things. You can start and stop the nodes. You can view Prometheus metrics, set up disaster recovery, manage backups, completely control your database. But there's still some problems there, right? And I probably don't have to convince anybody here why you want to automate things, but we do get this question a lot from our enterprise customers. They want to make sure, first of all, that the processes are consistent, they're standardized, and they're reliable. So they're not susceptible to human error from clicking on the UI. It helps you reduce repetitive tasks and allows you to scale your operations. Really important for enterprise, it lets you maintain your security policies, and it gives you detailed logs for auditing. And then finally, it reduces risks from staff changes, right? You train somebody on a UI and they leave, you have to train the next person on the UI. If you encode those in automation, you don't need to do that. Okay, so we have the APIs. One thing to remember is that our REST APIs expose the same code that's running on the UI. So if you do something on one side, you have it on the other side. And I'll demonstrate that in a second. You can put this code into your automation workflows, so things like Jenkins. These are REST APIs, so just to kind of review what that means is that it's a client-server architecture. The client is sending a request body, and the server is sending a response body. Those are stateless, and I'll talk about that in the live demo. And you use your typical HTTP methods, so get, post, etc. As an aside, Taylor talked about our various products. There are REST APIs for both of those, and they're very similar. But here's the doc page. If you want to follow along, it's api-docs.yugabyte.com. So BYOC means bring your own cloud. And it doesn't have to be a cloud, it can be on-prem. We just had a session on that. And so here's the home page for the control plane. I'm gonna do a very brief orientation to the docs, just because I think that's very useful when you're learning something. Okay, because the API endpoints are exposed, new ones are exposed when we get new features, this is a really active area of development. So the first thing you wanna do is you wanna choose the version of your control plane, not the database version, again, those are separate. So the version of your control plane to make sure that you're getting the complete list of endpoints. Okay, and then on the left are the endpoints, and those are grouped by category. So for example, under backups, you'll see a lot of endpoints. Here's an example one. So two things to focus on here. One is I've highlighted the route, and that's basically the URL that you're going to put in the HTTP request. And notice that there are placeholders for customer ID and universe ID. So those are things you need to pass with your route. And in the documentation, you can see the parameters that are required, as well as things like data type and sometimes some more information. Okay, so here's an example. You wouldn't use curl in your automation probably, but this is just a good way to test out the endpoints. So you can see the customer ID. You can see the customer ID here and the universe ID. And then I'll talk about this token here in just a second. A couple of other things to note here. I'm using these things right here, which again, you would not do in production, but it's just to kind of turn off the need for certificates and to deal with redirects. Because this is a GET request, there's no payload being passed. There's not going to be a request body. And then I'm just piping it through JQ so we can read it. So you can see here, when I get this is one of the backup endpoints. So what this is showing you is what the throttle parameters are. Basically, you can control how fast your backups run or how impactful they are. So right now, you see that the current value is 3 and the default value is 3. And that's pretty nice because you can compare and see if it's been tuned. And you can see the min and max as well. So that's a get. And again, it is reflected in the UI. So it's always going to be in sync because those things are happening on the back end. And this is helpful because if an enterprise, even though they may want standardization, reliability, et cetera, sometimes you have to go around automation in kind of like a break glass situation. And so the UI is always available. And here's a post request. So we're going to change that download buffer setting to 4. Something to note here is that you get this success true. For all of the API endpoints, you either get a true or a false. If you get a false, then you also get an error. If you get a true, sometimes you get a message as well that gives you more information. And of course, the UI immediately reflects the change because again, it's happening on the back end. All right, demo time. First, I want to show you, so within the UI, you can find your API token and you can find the URL of your, obviously of the platform that you've logged into. But what you do is you click on this little person up here and look at user profile. You can get the token programmatically from your login. I'm not doing that here. Probably you would want to do that in production. The URL, something to note, is wherever your script is running, you have to make sure that you have networking to that URL, or else it can't run. And the other thing here is the customer ID, which I'll show you in the demo, is available here. We're going to actually get it programmatically. Okay, so let's do the demo. I know that's not big enough. Hold on just a sec. All right. So a couple of things to point out here. I'm using a Jupyter notebook. Again, you're not going to do this in production, but it is a good way if you've never used Jupyter notebooks to kind of walk through and get feedback from Python in this case. And you can pull out this Python and put it into scripts. One thing this allows you to do is, I think I mentioned that because this is a REST API, it's stateless. And so either putting it in a script or doing like this allows you to load in variables and also to use some of the results from one API endpoint call into the next one. So we'll walk through that. I'm going to look at some user management and a backup example. We do have a lot of other examples, and I'll give you a link to that. But the user is not database users. It's actually the control plane users, and the backup is running on the database. So this is just an example of how all of the endpoints that we have allow you to control both the control plane as well as the data plane. Okay, I think that's all I want to tell you. Oh, one more thing is that throughout here, just to kind of quiet things and make the code simple, I have done some things that are just for the demo, like getting rid of certificate needs and warnings and stuff like that. But they're all marked in case you want to use this code. Okay, so live demo here. Okay, so I told you in order to use the endpoints, you have to have the URL and the API token. So we're going to load those up. I've actually put those in an environment file here and load those right in. And then that's going to go in that token's going to go in the header. Okay, so let me just load that up. Okay, if you haven't used Jupyter Notebooks before, what you're basically doing all along is you're running each block and you're waiting for it to give you some approval here. We're going to get the customer ID. So I'm getting that from the session info from the token and the URL. I'm running this endpoint to get the customer ID. Okay, so here's our first kind of actual endpoint. So here, this is a get, and we're going to have a route. We're not going to have a payload, just like in the curl example. I didn't have a payload for the get endpoint. So the route is here, which you would find in the documentation. And it's going to give us the list of current users. If you get the response, there's actually a lot more information that you get for users, but I limited it just for security reasons. Let's get details for a specific user. So I'm going to choose mine, which is this right here. And again, if you were doing this in automation, you wouldn't hard code things, but I'm hard coding it for the demo. So I've put that here. Okay, so this is going to get information for my user. Okay. Okay, so we can also use it to create things, right? So we've kind of did a get all and we did a get one. So this is a create one. So this time we will have a payload. So in these examples and the examples that you can find online, I've attempted to make these extremely minimal. There's a lot of other things you can put in the payload, but just to make sure it's working, it's good to have what that minimal payload is. So that's what these demonstrate. So this has the route again, and then also the payload. And we're going to do this. Okay, it created the user. And that was immediate. Keep that in mind when we get to the backups, because there are things that aren't immediate in the backups. And then we're going to delete a user because I saved that. Again, part of this is kind of getting around the statelessness of it. Then I can delete that user. And again, we see success true is what it comes back with. That's the whole response. Okay, so let's look at backups. So again, that was doing something on the control plane. This is doing something for the database nodes themselves. The only thing different in this setup here is that I'm hard coding the universe ID. This is going to be the same. Okay, so now we're going to create an ad hoc backup. So again, the minimal payload here, right? I need to tell it what the key space is and also the storage ID. So the storage is where the backup is actually going to be. This is GCP, so this is a Google Cloud bucket. And that is set up separately. There's also an endpoint for that. So this is that payload. Okay. So we're going to get a different, I'm going to run this one while I talk. Okay, we're going to get a different response for this. This actually didn't tell us that it succeeded. And why is that? Well, because databases take a while to back up. They're not immediate, right? Unlike the user that was just a write to a database, like an internal database, it takes a while. But what we do get is this task ID. And this is very common for a lot of the endpoints that take time to do things. You'll get this task ID and it runs in the background. So we can check on it. And I clicked on it kind of immediately so we could see that it wasn't done. And you see it's 25% done. you can see the status is running. So if you were doing this in your automation code, you would probably get that task ID and then wait for it until it was complete. It tells you the steps that it's going through: pre-flight checks, creating a table backup, and then finalizing the configuration. So let me click it again. I think it'll be 100% now. Yep, so 100%, and the status is done. Okay, so we don't have the backup ID in our script now. We have the task. We created the backup and we got the task ID, but we need to get the backup ID if we're going to do something with it. So this is just pulling that backup ID. We can list the existing backups. So this is kind of like a get many. Okay, and then let's figure out what the expiration is for that single backup. Okay, and then we're going to delete that backup. This does have, if you notice, this is slightly different because the delete is here, even though this is a post, the delete is in here, and then we're going to pass it some information, which has that backup ID. Okay, and again, we get a task ID. We don't get a success equals true yet, but this happens pretty fast. So 100% done, and status is success. Okay, let me go back to, actually, let me show you this. Okay, if you want, these examples, these Jupyter notebooks are in our main YugabyteDB code, and there's a lot of them there, and there's a lot of action around increasing the number of those there, so you can go there and find that. If you want to find, I actually took the endpoints and made a kind of a CLI app, put it all together in YugabyteDB, and that's available here if you want to look there as well. All right, that's it. Any questions? Okay, maybe a leading question. What kind of endpoints would you be interested in for automating tasks in production in day 2 ops?
Lunch is right outside, but we need a couple of questions to get warmed up.
Wow. Does anyone do day 2 ops? Oh, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I actually do. Strictly on AWS.
One sec. There are folks online as well. So
okay, thanks.
introduce yourself.
I'm Julian, July in short. I'm AWS engineer.
Okay.
So we mainly use Aurora, and I was wondering why I should switch in general. The API is amazing. What I see from it is pragmatic approach to all tasks you need to have, while on AWS that's not so pragmatic, if I can say so. But in general, why I should migrate to Yugabyte, all my clients, while Aurora is giving all I need, maybe, or I don't know. Of course, I had issues like outage of a master during a replication task for adding a slave on top of my RDS cluster. But in general, what are the benefits if I'm not that much distributed?
Okay, so let me kind of give a start to the answer, and then Valerie can fill in. So Aurora is a great database, and again, in terms of philosophy, being a Postgres compatible database, kind of we share that. We also believe in Postgres and believe that some kind of scalable, resilient, next-gen Postgres is kind of where the industry is headed. That said, architecturally, they're fundamentally different because one is a distributed database that can scale reads and writes. So rather than talking about why you would switch, I can talk about where we've seen customers switch from Aurora, if that is helpful, right? So if you need write scaling and you want to scale your writes beyond a point where you have a single write master in Aurora, even though the reads can be scaled using replicas, you still have one write node that you're writing to. right, in typical Aurora deployments. So if you want to get scalable writes and want to have all your nodes taking writes, that is one scenario where you'd go for a truly distributed database. The second one, as you mentioned, is some kind of geo distribution that crosses region boundaries, right? So if you have users in multiple regions, you want them accessing a single database table or a single database, and you want to provide localized access, or you want to provide region-level resilience, right, where you're either doing DR or you're actually doing a stretch cluster, a single database cluster stretched across multiple regions. These are things that you can do with the distributed database. You don't have that ability to do it with Aurora, okay? Third thing, of course, is we are an open source database and we are multi-cloud. Pretty much wherever you want to deploy YugabyteDB, you can. So if it is on AWS, you can do it. If it is in your VPC, our VPC, you can do it. If you want to do it on Kubernetes, bare metal, as I said, pretty much anywhere. So deployment flexibility is a big thing for what we offer. And as Jake had mentioned in the Netscope presentation, open source, right, commercially supported or commercially available open source is a big thing for a lot of companies, right? And so if you want to get something that you can start testing yourself, you have optionality. So open source is not just about, hey, it's software and it has a community. There is that, but there is also strategic optionality. If you want to walk away from a commercial relationship and you want to do it yourself, go for it, right? And we have companies that are in our open source community, have never really contacted us beyond asking us a few questions on our community Slack, and they're using us in massive deployments in production, right? And so that is definitely something that gives a lot of companies peace of mind. So these are some reasons, multi-region, right scaling, open source, and so take your pick.
Okay, the only thing I'll add is that from a day two perspective, the endpoints, once I started looking at the options that other databases have, our set of endpoints is really, really robust. Like I said, it exposes everything that you can get in the UI. So basically anything that can be done on the control plane or the database can be done through the APIs. And that's one of the reasons you go to cloud, right, is to be able to do that kind of thing. Yes?
I'm Justin Hanselman. I'm an independent contributor. I am curious about the APIs. They seem awesome. Are there any plans to either house them in Terraform, like create modules or any IAC-like constructs like Pulumi or anything, so that I don't have to write like my own essential scripts that then have to go through QA and processing, and then if I go to another company, it's another thing I'm doing? Is this just like the start, or is this basically like we just want the API, we hope an open source community will take on modularizing it?
Right. So we have a lot of different ways to automate because we deal with enterprises who have a lot of different ways that they like to handle things, right? So for example, if you're really entrenched into Jenkins and you just need a Python script to put in there, this is perfect. We do also have Terraform examples. We have a Kubernetes operator, so there's basically many ways to automate. It's a very strong focus. Yeah. Yes?
Hold on 1 second.
So this whole presentation, I have not seen an aspect of zero downtime. Does that mean like Yugabyte is a true zero downtime solution, or like can you provide some insights to that?
Yeah, and do we have a presentation coming up on that? Because that's a big deal, and
Yeah, we have a whole presentation on ultra resilience, which gets into zero downtime and what the RTO is when you have a single cluster. So one of the things we talk about is the active deployment. Rakuten talks about it as well in their presentation, where you have like 3-second RTO and 0 RPO. So we have deployments like that. We also have options where if you want to have clusters in multiple regions and asynchronously replicating between them with low RTO, that is another option. So we give you a lot of options, and depending on your workload, you can pick. If you want zero downtime, you can actually do it with a stretch cluster as well. In fact, one of the biggest retailers in the world runs their product catalog on us with zero downtime, even through a Texas snowstorm, right? So we can talk about that. The afternoon session will get into that in more detail.
Yeah, I think anytime someone was mentioning resilience earlier, that was all about that zero downtime. Yeah.
The first question you asked
asked yourself a question, right? Like what kind of endpoint? Can you finish the thought on that? You asked us, but I want
Your leading question on what kind of endpoints would you want to see?
Yeah, that was the question. You know, if you do day 2 ops, are there any endpoints that you would be interested in having? Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you.